Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we're going week to week, watching something available on streaming, providing some context and some recommendations along the way. Currently, we are watching Industry, which we'll be discussing in great detail today, and also currently watching The Pitt on HBO Max. We approached the midpoint of that season, and a really excellent episode last week. So do check it out if you haven't caught up, and do listen to our podcast coverage if you have. In those episodes, we also discuss Drops of God, the Apple TV, what would you call it, character mystery drama, mostly just wine porn. And we're just a couple of weeks away from wrapping that up. An entertaining, if non-essential season so far. And we've also been rewatching Christopher Nolan's filmography, awaiting the release this summer of the Odyssey. So if you are a Nolan fan, feel free to watch or rewatch those films and listen to our conversations. We just did Memento last week, and our next episode will be around Insomnia, maybe one of my favorite films of his that has really been forgotten over time and not available to stream. So kind of speaks to the fact, first of all, maybe why it's not so popular, but also chicken or egg type situation. Probably one of the only films I think of his that is not available to stream. Possibly because it's just not that popular, but definitely overlooked. And we'll probably publish that episode this week. The deluge of streaming releases from January have mostly quieted down. And as the Winter Olympics are wrapping up, I would expect to start seeing a lot more premieres. The big premiere, of course, later this very month is Paradise. To date, still our most popular show here covered on the podcast. I thought Pluribus might catch up to it, but nope, looks like Paradise continues to be our most popular watch. And I guess in anticipation of the second season, we've seen an uptick in those downloads once again of that first season. And Darren and I will be covering that just the week after we wrap things up with Industry. Lots of premieres throughout March as well. And of course, The Pitt will roll through March as well. So make sure you subscribe if you'd like to follow along with all that content. And we'll keep you in the loop. What's new to stream? Popular and overlooked films from last year that are popping up on our streaming services now. We'll keep you on top of all that streaming news, along with our coverage of these new streaming shows. So in today's episode, we're going to break down this most recent episode of Industry, Dear Henry. And oh boy, what an incredible episode this was. This episode, so long and so packed with events, could easily be a season finale, but of course resolves absolutely nothing, and not in a satisfying way where it's a cliffhanger for the next season, but really is simply just setting up so many things we've seen throughout the course of this season of television. So truly just an astounding episode. If you are a fan of the show, this is one of the elite episodes of this season, of a series, I should say. And Darren will be joining me for that conversation as we break down this current episode. Before then, I wanted to follow up on the revelations from last week. Tender is, for all intents and purposes, a Ponzi scheme, but one that has been audited and has won over the ruling class in this fictionalized Britain. But it made me think about real world analogs for this. Has anyone actually done this before? And I say this as someone who is, again, not an economist, but fascinated by this. And not only because of the dealings of these very rich and powerful economic brokers, and how more and more it seems to be, or maybe just I'm becoming more aware of it, have infiltrated the culture at large, but also how not only that this culture of wealth above all other things has led to some very sketchy financial collapses in the past decades, but perhaps always was so. So all that was to say that I started to think to myself, what might be an analog for this in the real world? And by the way, if you are an economist, if you are much more in the know of these examples, I would love to hear from you guys. needssomeintroduction@gmail.com, or on Spotify, post a comment on one of our episodes, or on YouTube as well. But I would love to hear from people who have more expertise than I do. I'm only a hobbyist in this, but am interested in it. So this analysis right now, this commentary I'm going to make is pretty high level. mostly from reading a lot of Wikipedia articles and some related articles. So if you'd like to clarify anything I'm providing, or if you want to do your own research, I will provide enough context so you can do that. So I'm not going to be a total breakdown of every possible analog here, but a handful of them that I discovered, one that immediately came to mind, but then others that I kind of secondarily through my research discovered. Okay, the first thing that came to mind immediately was a huge story here in the United States, maybe not as popular or famous worldwide, but it was the collapse of FTX and, of course, the founder, Sam Bankman-Fried. And this was a very charismatic person who, in the room, really was able to sell this vision of a crypto future that would make everybody wealthier. He became a huge contributor to Democratic political candidates and seemed to have connected himself politically to everybody who was needed to basically make crypto a mainstream economic product. And despite the fact that perhaps the biggest celebrity in this world was revealed to be running a giant Ponzi scheme, irony of ironies that crypto continues to be an incredibly influential and powerful political force, economic force as well. And maybe what that says, and maybe what the commentary, the underlying commentary of what industry is trying to reveal over the course of this series. And I'll get into a little more of that. But first of all, just the facts. So as I mentioned, FTX was this ever-growing brokerage for crypto and had this vision they were selling that anyone could buy crypto, anyone could get rich, you just have to get in early. Having an app, a platform that was growing incredibly quickly. But then what happened was that they had a subordinate, a secondary company called Alameda Research. And even though they presented the fact that this Alameda Research and FTX were completely separate from each other, it turned out that this was double accounting. So FTX created its own cryptocurrency, FTT, which was FTX token. And then it turned out Alameda had a huge amount of FTT on its books. And then Alameda would buy the FTT, these tokens, with the very same money that they were borrowing from FTX. So basically, one was borrowing against the valuation of the other to buy more of this crypto. And then, of course, as FTX had more crypto, their valuation would go up because it looked like, wow, everybody's buying these tokens and the price is going up. And then when that valuation went up, they would use it to, similarly, like we saw here, they bought other assets. They bought real estate, etc. And then Alameda would borrow from FTX to purchase more assets. And they were just growing. Look, Alameda is growing as fast as FTX. But what were they primarily buying? They were buying these tokens, the very tokens that were how FTX was increasing its market value. So it was a circular self-inflation of this currency by borrowing wealth that you do not have because you don't have any actual real assets, and then to buy the tokens, the currency that you have manufactured within the other business, and then using that to say, well, my assets are worth more. Now I can go buy actual real world assets using this inflated value, and then that increases the value of the underlying business, which then allows it to generate more tokens, which then are acquired by the other side of your business. You're buying your own cash and then setting the value of it. And of course, they're hiding the fact that they're buying their own currency. If this was just anonymous transactions, these were just anonymous users buying all these tokens, then of course the value of the token is going up. But if you're simply buying your own tokens and then borrowing money to buy your own tokens and then paying your debt in those tokens, this is a house of cards that is going to collapse. It's hollow in the center. And that's exactly what ended up happening. But of course, many very powerful people continued to vouch for this and wanted it to succeed. Even as this was coming apart, there were still many people who were trying to hide the fact that it was coming apart or come up with some way to keep this thing afloat. And of course, all of that correlates back to what we see in this very episode of the show as a fallout from the current or from the revelations last week. Okay, that's the one that came to my mind right away, and something that, of course, happened here in the United States, a very big deal. especially since I work in technology and a lot of the people I know were very high on crypto when this whole thing fell apart. And it dampened the investment in crypto temporarily. And then, of course, all that money went over to AI. So there's this kind of conversation that goes on between those two segments of the economy. But crypto continues to climb as well. Despite the recent slide in the value of those cryptocurrencies, they're still incredibly valued, even from this point in time when FTX went bankrupt. However, and you folks who are listening to us over in Europe, you are probably way more aware of this particular corollary, which is much closer. And as I mentioned, I was looking for other similar stories or economic collapses similar to FTX when I found the Wirecard fraud case that took place in Germany that I think was much more on the nose and a much closer corollary to what we see here in industry. So Wirecard began in 1999. Marcus Braun joined as the CEO. Most of this is right from the Wikipedia article, by the way. And of course, very similar to what we see in industry, this company primarily made its initial or achieved its original success providing online payment services for porn and gambling websites. This is before the whole OnlyFans world. So, of course, in industry, OnlyFans, another thing that you'd want to probably anonymize your transactions around these OnlyFans or the huge amount of money that goes through these sex work websites, and much more prevalent in the moment, definitely more so than it was in 2002. And of course, this part of it is very different than what happens in industry. The way they ended up on the top 30 stocks, the index, the German stock index, was by purchasing a defunct call center company, simply by purchasing them. And in retrospect, this was a way they avoided some of the audit, but it simply allowed people to buy into this stock by this backdoor way of getting onto the index. And as their stock price started to climb, they continued to show massive growth. And their stock price climbed, and eventually they were one of the highest market cap companies on the German stock market. But here's where there's so many parallels to what happens in industry. Not only do we see like the Austrian CEO, and of course, not that there is an Austrian CEO here in the show, but this whole Austrian connection, just the fact that there is this connection to Germany, again, makes you immediately prick up your ears and think about this connection, probably intentionally drawing that parallel to something that's happened in the real world. But long story short is they were manufacturing these transactions to inflate their market value and then hiding the fact that the company didn't have this valuation by overpaying for other assets. So this was not in Africa, it was actually in Asia, but they were paying millions of dollars for cheap acquisitions of other small banks and other small real estate properties, and then overpaying for them intentionally to say, oh, well, where did those billions of dollars we say that we're worth, where did they go? Oh, we've been buying all this real estate. But of course, lying about the, paying off the owners of those properties with stock options so that they would claim the higher valuation, knowing that they would get the money in the back end once the stock price hit a certain IPO. And the thing that's different in industry and clever there is that they actually buy a bank. And then by having the bank, they can actually say, well, all of the transactions that we say that we're claiming we have are hidden inside of this bank and hidden in the protections that are offered by a bank to their clientele, which is how this all came apart. Because what actually ended up happening was all these falsified transactions were actually falsified by accountants who then signed off on these fake transaction logs, usually were bribed or manipulated in other ways. So maybe if they had purchased their own bank, like they do here in industry, and they hadn't raised enough red flags, which apparently a lot of this shadiness did eventually raise flags, it ended up being their undoing. And also EY, the Ernst & Young, who was their auditors, also got into a lot of trouble because they signed off on their audit. So what turned out was that a lot of these falsified transactions that were coming from these Asian companies, EY was reviewing them and signing off on it. So in this particular case, everything was falsified. The actual accounts were fake. The transactions were fake. They bribed the bank officials in Asia to sign off on the transaction logs. The auditors only checked the transaction logs and never went back and checked the original transactions themselves. And as they claim to have these massive volumes of transactions, then legitimate, they're saying, oh, we have transactions for airlines and for payrolls for all these companies around the world, all falsified to pump up the value of the company. And then, of course, as the stock price climbed, they could borrow more money, but then they had to hide it. So they would buy these assets at cheap assets for huge amounts to justify their stock price. And again, in the center, nothing. It was all made up. Now, the really fascinating part about this is the political angle, which may be something that we do see in the last couple of episodes of this season of the show. Very similar to what we see in industry, Germany desperately wanted to be pro-business. They felt like they had been left behind, oftentimes by overregulating European banks, and how financial tech platforms in general had moved away from Europe. And Germany wanted to prove they were willing to encourage and grow homegrown tech companies. So the government was heavily vested in this company being a success. And there was a journalist named Dan McCrum from the Financial Times who investigated Wirecard for a decade practically. Amazing that this happened. The company was in 2015 when these things started to unravel. I think 2018 is when the bank finally collapsed. But when he was publishing stories, trying to uncover some of his findings or explaining some of his findings and uncover the truth of the manipulations that were happening within the business itself, the German regulators, pressured by the government, actually filed charges against the newspaper for falsifying their stories. So they did not create a new audit. What they actually asked for was that these journalists be investigated for trying to manipulate the market. And the last connection that makes this such a tight analog is that Wirecard actually had connections to the German intelligence services and was investigating the people who were investigating the company. And worse yet was that the COO, Marsalek, had connections to the Russian Secret Service as well, which we hear that, minor spoiler if you haven't actually finished watching the current episode, Dear Henry, but it appears that the real puppeteers of this tender scam, let's call it, may be the Russian government, or at least some of the powerful oligarchs within there. And of course, this was an incredible embarrassment in 2020, the collapse of the company, mostly due to just public outcry. There was enough questions that required a new audit, and KPMG came in to do a full new audit, of course, something that's asked for in this very episode of show, and the company collapsed. The stock price collapsed from 104 euros down to 2 euros per share, a 97% collapse. The CEO was arrested, and the COO, Marsalek, escaped back to Russia and is still a fugitive. But while I was continuing my investigation, so many other examples came up. One that I thought of right away, not in my research, but just something that came to mind, was, of course, the Theranos blood testing vaporware, that amazing story of Elizabeth Holmes, who promised to, hey, you can run all these blood tests, and just being charismatic in a room, just getting people motivated to invest in an idea where there was absolutely no evidence that this thing worked and ever did and ever would, that the value of the company went to the billions before it all collapsed. And that one really just feels like the steamrolling effect of someone who's lying and people are giving them money and they just keep telling the lie and they can't find a way out of the situation, as opposed to something that's much more malicious. And I was really surprised to find, when I was just looking, for example, for people who had used Ghana specifically to launder money, there's a whole history of British companies, since Ghana is a former colony, and Russian companies via British connections or sometimes directly doing business there, of also buying, for example, Guyanese gold at very inflated prices as a way to hide Russian wealth or to launder it, basically. And as I'm doing this investigation, And there are other cases as well. And by the way, if you have either better, stronger analogs than I came up with, please, once again, share them with me. I'd love to read further about this. It just made me think about the overall project of what perhaps industry is trying to do is not necessarily to say that this is a bad actor, just like Wirecard, and that there are just these bad apples. I think what is being represented here in the show, and not just this year, but in general, is the emptiness of this culture, this idea that the only thing that matters is increasing your wealth. And it doesn't matter how you do it. It just matters that you do it. And that these aren't the outliers, but that this is the culture at large. So it really made me think about the fact that not as overt as it is in the case where you have completely manufactured 100% of the valuation of your company. Not something so obscene as that, but how all of these companies are probably to some extent manipulating their valuations, and how, of course, the governments are vested in continuing to project that so that they can claim that their economy is growing, that things are going good, that they can print more money because their companies are worth more. And then if they distribute that money to even some of it, to the people at large, that they feel like wealthier. And it's all made up. Maybe like the culture, this whole culture we're in, the money's fake and the business's values are fake and the products they make are fake or at least overstated. And even the technology itself, I oftentimes think about, like, has Facebook made the world a better place? Like this huge valuation for these companies that are some of the most successful companies in the world. How much value are they really generating? And then, of course, what does it incentivize when the only thing that matters is more clicks, more attention, more money, more valuation, regardless of whether there is anything, if there is a there, basically. And I think the show wants us to ask that question, because you think of something just as obvious as these very notorious Ponzi schemes in the past, where they are literally just distributing their wealth and saying, well, if I return that percent of return, and that is actually all the deposits they got that year, and they're saying, well, if that's just my 4% interest, well, then what's the underlying reverse engineering, what the value of the company is from there, when in the center, there is no actual asset generating wealth. It is simply the money that's coming in that's being paid out as quote unquote interest. And of course, that is overtly illegal. But then it makes me wonder how close, with all this clever math, how close are we with so many companies out there, so much the valuation of so many of these companies? How close are we to basically having maybe not 100% of the value of companies, but how much? Is it 20%? Is it 30%? Is it 80% overstated? Are these companies that barely make a couple of $1 billion a year in profit and have no real plan to significantly increase their profits year to year, are they really $1.5 trillion companies? Is that true? And then the question is, what is true? Because if people are willing to buy your stock, if people are willing to believe your story, then it is true. So are these people con men, or are they visionaries? Or are they con men who are telling themselves they're visionaries? I think the show sees them definitely as con men. But does the culture at large? I'm not sure. I think we are in a historic moment where we love our con men. All right, let me bring Darren in on the conversation, where we're going to break down this crazy episode of show, Dear Henry. All right, Darren. So a couple of things I want to talk to you about before we get into the breakdown of this really very eventful. I mean, this episode was so long. I actually paused it about halfway through, and I'm like, oh my God, was that the episode? And there was still like 30 minutes left, or like 28 minutes. So I'm like, wow, this is a 1 hour episode. Episode's been relatively short this season, but this is a long one and there's so much to talk about. But before we get into that, a couple of things I wanted to run by you. First of all, you mentioned to me off mic that you have caught up on the new Game of Thrones prequel series. Did I oversell it to you? How did you like it in general?
Okay, so what's it? I keep calling it Game of Thrones, but it's called Night of the Seven Kingdoms.
A Night of the Seven Kingdoms.
Mate, I'm loving it.
Loving it, right?
It's fantastic. I've caught up really, really quickly. I was actually shocked there was only, what, 3 or 4 episodes out. What was last night? Was that the fourth or the fifth?
That's the fifth. Yep.
The fifth, yes. And now it was very light show. It was very small. I love the costuming,
Yep.
the sets, the accents are amazing. Really takes you back into this world of Westeros. And I was like, I'm down for the fart jokes. I'm down for the poo jokes. This is all a very easy watch until last night.
Got so rough, so fast.
My goodness. Yeah. Blood and guts and caved in heads everywhere. And what an episode. Not sure what I prefer, whether it's the easygoing nature of the first few or this brutal battle episode, but fully on board with this show. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I loved it as well. I like that. And by the way, also the flashback to his youth, also incredibly brutal to watch these kids growing up the way that they did. And as far as my taste, I like the lightness of it. And I think in general, these stories are like that. But of course, this is Game of Thrones. So Game of Thrones got a Game of Thrones. You got to kill off your favorite characters every once in a while. It's just how they roll. So yeah, that was pretty rough stuff without spoiling anything. But yeah, an incredible battle sequence. And this isn't my observation. It's something I read in an article talking about the show. But I, again, love how small stakes the show is. And they made a really clever observation that I had not even thought about, which is when we see the flashback to King's Landing, if this was Game of Thrones and they have infinite money to throw at it, we would have a giant shot of them walking through castle walls and probably like a $10 million special effect budget for this sequence. Instead, what we do is we see it's so small scale from the perspective of the kids themselves. And all we have is a very evocative and very well decorated alleyway, which you can shoot like on a small set. So all this is to say that despite the hugeness of that, maybe not hugeness, I should say, even the battle sequence itself, the muddy and gritty battle that we see there is all from like almost inside of the knight's helmet. So it kind of allows you to make this not at a giant scale. But I have to say, again, the intimacy of this story, I love it. I think it's the right direction for the show, this overall project to go in.
That's a great word, the intimacy of the story. That matches with the intimacy of the sets. Like you say, there's no wide shots, or very rare, few wide shots. I mean, it's all set in this kind of battle village and a few little tents. I love the King's Landing bits they are from the streets. They're from the gutter. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's where you see that from. I think there is one shot when he just meets his knight, one shot of King's Landing from way away, which I was like, oh, I know that set. I know that city from years ago. But yeah, just a beautiful little story that is getting really interesting at the moment. Absolutely. I love Egg. I love little Egg. He's a great character. He's just so joyous. Actor.
Yeah.
The acting is superb. Like, I'm so behind him and really interested in this way that he sees the world, just this excitement of a small child, even though he's got a responsibility. Yeah, so fun.
Yeah, I love all of it. And I think the chemistry, if you ever see the behind the scenes, even these inside jokes that you see on camera where he chastises him as his squire, even after he knows exactly who he is. You see the actors in those little featurettes afterwards, if you ever watch them, and they seem to have the exact same chemistry off, behind the scenes. And I think that's been baked into their relationship. So I think they did an incredible job of casting these two non-professional actors. You have this kid who's so young, has never acted in anything before, and you have the knight, who's actually a former rugby player, who's also has no acting credits or barely any acting credits before now. And two like novice actors who have incredible chemistry with each other. I just love this whole project. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I didn't realize they were both non-professionals. I did know that Dunk is a former rugby player. I have to look him up because I'm a fan of World Rugby. Just so natural. And he does really seem like an ex-sportsman. He kind of has this kind of like single-minded focus, but kind of little blank about other
Right.
things in life
Yeah.
because he's just focused on this one thing. Yeah, hilarious. And the shot inside the helmet at last night's battle was so frightening, how you just couldn't see anything that's coming
Right.
at you. You just get smacked in the head by a mace, and you don't see it coming.
Yeah, and I love that, by the way, that we have rarely seen that. And exactly what you described, you never think about that. Like, wow, this is like such a hindrance to how you actually perceive the world, and it's part of that demystification. Another thing that I love about this, the way this show is written, I think very subtly, even though it's pretty light, that there's some really beautiful thing happening here where you see Duncan becoming a knight, right? Like we presume he says that he was knighted before his his champion died and had knighted him beforehand, but we actually don't believe that, and we never see it. But then what we see is there are multiple times when he basically does get knighted over and over again. And even last night, this very honorable king who, no, things don't work out great for him without spoiling too much. But the way he like lays his hand on his shoulder, it's as if, again, one week after the other, he is being knighted and he's actually becoming a knight. But what's so fascinating about it is the reality of this world versus the mythology, which of course is what Martin is always doing, is kind of demystifying these fantasy stories. And again, it's the idea that this guy is a knight now, right? Because in history, he faced this challenge. Like he actually had to do this challenge. So if he wasn't a knight before, because he actually had this horrible fight that he had to participate in, it made him a knight because now in the books, he's a knight, right? So it's very backwards way that this guy has achieved what he wanted, but definitely not how he wanted to. And that kind of explains how maybe everybody in this story has entered it, and maybe in Game of Thrones in general, has entered it in a way that you don't expect. And minor spoilers here for like episode 3 or something, but we know there's a vision that this prince has had, and this prince in the mythology of Game of Thrones does actually have visions of the future, has seen him partake in a battle in which he survives and a dragon dies. But you think about this guy who accidentally becomes a knight, who may eventually be very important, but how he got to this point is not the way you read in the history, in the fantasy novels, right? That's the way that people tell the story after the fact. This is the actual way that you become a knight. Like a lot of lying and accidents and stupidity, and that's how you get to where these people got to.
Yeah, it's very curious, isn't it? Because dragons still don't really exist in this time of Game
Disappeared,
of Thrones.
right?
Yeah, so yeah, the fact that Duncan may end up facing a dragon, probably not in this season, but maybe in seasons to come, then it's just, yeah, really, really interesting. I do like the stories of the knights travel the lands, and that actually tells their story and makes them higher in standing, because Egg knows stories of all the knights. But I can't remember if he knew the story of Dunk's knight or whether
he did not. This guy was so unknown, right? Exactly.
Even though he did do some things, Dunk assures us he did do some things, and he battled on the side of lots of different kings over the years, but no one quite remembers him.
He's not. I mean, he's a hedge knight, right? He sleeps under trees. He doesn't have his own fiefdom or anything. So it's these are, and again, I'm sure there were more of those knights than there were of the ones who had their own lands and castles assigned to them because they won some famous battle. They probably were like this, right? They're like samurais, in the old Japanese legends, where you just go where the winds blow you and you get paid to do work, in these different spots, and you just kind of move from one. You're like a contractor, basically. So, and that's exactly what he was. Although we do see a little of his backstory too, right? His son had just died, who was his squire, and he is, basically a drunken idiot from that moment forward. But he does actually honorably, defend Dunk, and that's how they meet in the first place.
Yeah, really interesting. I'd love to see more about him. I like how he pops up in flashbacks because, yeah, he looks like a pretty fascinating character.
He had one very notable, what's the word?
I think the opening of episode 2, I think my wife walked into the room just as it opened. She's like, what are you watching?
What is this? That was the funniest thing about this, by the way. Before I watched the show, and I did not catch up with it until week 2, I guess I binged the first 2 episodes and loved them. And I had heard mostly positive reviews, but a couple of things I'd heard was, oh, it's Game of Thrones for kids. And I'm like, I don't know, after last night's episode. And by the way, these are critics who got to see the entire show up ahead of time. And I'm like, after last night's episode, that is not for kids. And yeah, I mean, there's quite a few scenes in this show that I'm like, I don't know what these kids are. Oh my God. By the way, speaking of the writing on this show, the song about the 3-fingered woman and from last week, man, amazing. I laughed out loud. I rarely laugh out loud when I'm watching something by myself. I cackled throughout that entire conversation when Egg is going, do you think her name was actually Alice? I think her name was Hope. Oh my God. The way he broke down that story and going, well, she's making the best of her difficult situation. I was like, oh my God. I was crying. I was laughing so hard.
Oh man. I love Egg. He's great.
Oh, I do too. Anyway, more of that. And by the way, we won't have to wait long for that. This show was supposed to premiere in the summer of last year, and they're already shooting season 2. And I think very much intentionally, just the way that HBO has gotten into a rhythm with the Pitt. We're currently, it's exactly 1 year between season 1 and season 2 of the Pitt. They're working on season 3, so that one will probably be out also within a year. And I think they intentionally delayed the release of this first season of the show so that they'll have this momentum. And I'm sure that popularity of the show will only grow over the course of the rest of the few months of the year. And then because they delayed things by like 6 months, that means that the second season will be hot on its heels, like probably within a year in that window. And more of that, guys, just especially with a 6-episode order, this is something they should be able to knock these out every single year and just do that, man. Don't make us wait 3 or 4 years for 5 episodes of a show. Like, you got to get on like a rhythm of releasing these things, and they got to get better at that. But I think that they're figuring it out.
6 episodes. That's all there is. I'm shocked.
You know what? This is I haven't read the book. This is a 100-page novella, which supposedly by episode 3, I think, of the show, there were only like 30 pages left in that novelette, whatever you call it, novella. So which means that, they added the flashbacks, they added other details to flesh this out. They made the battle much bigger. Apparently it's very faithful to what in the book, but the battle takes place in like a paragraph. And of course they made it into like a whole episode. So they've extended that. And I'm sure they are extending the finale and probably introducing characters that will matter in the next book, because there are already 3 novels, short novels published. And Martin is working on more of these. He will never finish the Game of Thrones saga, but he's working on these, which is fine. You know what? That's okay. Just these are good too, George. If you're not going to finish the overall story, then give us more of these at least along the way. But 100 pages he can do. But anyway, the point is that I wouldn't want them to do what they did with House of the Dragon, where they're taking basically a 170-page text that is like a paragraph about each one of these characters and spinning it out into like 5 seasons of show. It's like, it's too much filling in the blanks. This is actually better. Give me a concise, story. Give me characters I love and one big event in basically what turns out to be like 3 hours of TV. That's fine. That's all I need. I don't need to have people die in every single episode of the show, right? So as a matter of fact, that's
totally fine.
Too try hard.
Yeah, and it's just so easy to sit down and watch a 30-minute episode. I mean, you can watch it at any time of the day or night. Right. It's just bring it, give it to me, and big fan.
Yeah, love it. And I wouldn't be surprised if these episodes get longer and the stories get more complex. And if there are dragons, the budgets will get bigger. But by then, the show will justify that, I would presume. But, for now, hey, if I get 3 or 4 seasons like this, 6 episodes, and in and out quick, and fine by me. I love this first season of the show.
Yeah, I don't necessarily need to see dragons. I mean, they had a puppet dragon in there for a
Right.
couple of episodes, and it was fantastic looking.
It was beautiful, right? Can you imagine that? Actually, so that's very advanced puppetry for sure.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about Dear Henry. Oh,
Whew.
before we get into the breakdown, I have so many. I mean, I was trying to just be like, let's just hit the big scenes, and I was taking notes before you joined, and I'm like, I think there's at least 10 big scenes. So we're gonna have to spend a lot of time going through this. But before we get into all that, you just general impressions. What did you think of this episode?
Yeah, whirlwind of an episode. I didn't take any notes. I was just captivated. So many answers and so many more questions.
Right.
Yeah, all the characters get a bit of chunk, especially poor old Eric. And we have to discuss what happened to
Oh,
him or what
yes,
we
yeah.
think's happened to him. Kid Harrington gets some massive scenes. Whitney is almost at the end of his tether as well. Yeah, it's just a whirlwind. I'm just going to have to go through it with you because I don't know what exactly happened.
There's so much to talk about. So yeah, and originally I was actually thinking about how we're going to address this. Do we start from the back? Anyway, I'm just think we have to walk through the plot. So let's start off at the beginning of the episode. Right away, we see Yasmin and Harper meet, and a few things. So first of all, Harper being brutally honest to Yasmin, and she has been petty. And I'm very curious to get your opinion on this. She has been petty. She has been, selfish. She has been definitely undermining her friends. But maybe it required, maybe the show's saying that she needed to confront the death of her mother and finally being proven right in some way in her actual line of work. Because I think she comes to Yasmin. She does not need to give Yasmin a warning here. I think she's coming to Yasmin as a friend. I actually do think she's coming as a friend. And she warns Yasmin that you and your husband have been duped by this man. She saw you as fools. Yasmin, of course, does not want to hear this, but she does start to think about what she says, which I think is also interesting. In the moment, she's furious at Harper, but I think it does start to get into her head. And then the part she says until the end, she says, I want to have security come and escort you out of the building. And she goes, I dare you to. But she does it. So she's not that petty. But what do you think about this? Harper, I don't think she's there to throw a wrench in the works. I think she's actually there to be a friend to Yasmin. And I actually, in the moment, thought maybe this is a mistake. She shouldn't be warning her, allowing them to perhaps warn Whitney and start allowing him to get ahead of it in some ways, although maybe it's too late for any of that. But what do you think about this opening scene?
I feel like Yasmin has already twigged a little bit about what Whitney's all about. I don't think this is her first warning. So she's feeling self-conscious because of that and that she may have been duped. So Harper telling her that she has been duped it makes her feel like she's just a silly little girl again. She can't operate as well as her father did in the business world, whereas Harper can amazingly separate personal from business in this sense. Whereas Yasmin, she's still trying to be this business person. She basically creates her own position at this company and she's trying to live up to it. But yeah, I think she's twigged that Whitney is a little bit extra.
Yeah, I'm actually very curious to see the next week's episode based on the trailer, where it seems to be all Yasmin and Harper, or primarily that seems to be what the episode's about. And the reason I mention that is because I never really made this connection in the show, or maybe I have at different times felt like Harper and Yasmin are different sides of the same coin in some ways. And in this season, it felt like Yasmin had landed on firmer ground. So I didn't really keep making those analogies until now. Like you mentioned, it's like just seeing that Harper has been able, whether she's just lying to herself or not, but to the most part, especially in this moment, has been able to divorce those things from each other. And Yasmin, yeah, I think it is that she is, again, in a way, making her decisions for a man, whether that was her dad before or whether it is her husband now. And you mentioned how she can't like divorce those things from each other. And it's interesting to use the word divorce because in this particular case, she is again riding her husband's coattails, right? Even though she's the only reason he was able to get his act together to get to this point, which maybe in the end was the wrong choice. But still, she needed him to come out of his depression for her to be able to rise up. And I think she still is in that position. And Harper, of course, on the upper side, on the opposite side of that, is the exact opposite, right? She has been fully self-made. She did not inherit any of this. She didn't inherit her status or her reputation or her celebrity from her husband or father or anything. Yeah, so it's these very opposite sides of things. But I do think that they're going to come together to some extent before the end of the season.
Come together like in opposition or as friends?
Well, I don't know. It looks like they're making out in that trailer. So
oh, I didn't say the trailer.
That doesn't mean that they will be friends either. Depending, based on this show, that doesn't mean anything. Speaking of which, in the very next scene, we got to talk, man, what's this show? What a crazy show. So in the very next scene, I can't even parse what's going on in this moment. We have Whitney walks in. He is renting out the house that they live in, by the way, we discover. And by the way, finding out some of his activities with, if he gives you a room to stay in, you may not want to be in that room that he's rented out for you, by the way, or that, considering where the hidden cameras might be. Exactly. Yeah. Everywhere. Check everywhere for cameras. But so he walks into the room. I can't even parse this scene. It's too much. I'm overloaded. He walks in. We hear the narration for the first time. Dear Henry, he's writing a letter to Henry over and over again, revising it over the course of this episode. He says, I have a hole in my bucket, which apparently is from the final version of the letter, because we do hear that part again at the end. We find out what the hole in the bucket means. At first, I actually thought maybe he meant there was an emotional hole in this bucket. Of course, he's talking about the actual cash flow in this business. But he shows up with flowers in his hands. We have Joni Mitchell's song, Both Sides Now, playing on the radio. And for some reason, and I don't know what the reason is here, I can't parse all of this, like I said, he's singing He Is an Englishman, right? Which is like a satire on English aristocracy in the shower. But the Joni Mitchell song is playing, I don't know, apropos of nothing. And then here's the question I have for you. So we have this internal monologue going on for Whitney. He walks into the bathroom. He's practically, and do you take this literally or not? Because he's practically like in the shower stall with him, which I assume that didn't actually happen because he didn't notice that someone was like 2 inches behind him. But of course, this is when Yasmin shows up. And not only is she like, what the hell is going on here? Again, already wary of Whitney, given the conversation she just had with Harper. But not only that, but when Henry turns around, he obviously is not uncomfortable with him seeing him that way. So he's definitely enjoying this flirtation he has going with him, even though they don't quite consummate it. But it's something that's been ongoing for the entire season, obviously. So what do you make of this? This is crazy psychodynamics going on in this scene.
There's a lot going on there. Look, Whitney just made a wrong turn. He doesn't know the house. He just rented it. That's what he says to Yasmin. Just made a wrong turn, ended up in the shower with her husband. Mm-hmm. I didn't pick the Joni Mitchell track, but yeah, the track that Kit Harington is singing is I think it's Gilbert and Sullivan musical or something. Yep. Mm-hmm. Very appeals to this high class Englishman. I think it's great. He's so into the music, he doesn't think to turn around and see who's spying on him. I did see online that someone equated this scene with a scene from The Talented Mr. Ripley, when Ripley, the kind of lower class person, is peeking in on the high class person and trying to get into his life, which is very interesting because the actor is Geller and his dad directed The Talented Mr.
Very good
Ripley.
Connection. Yeah, interesting connection there for sure.
And I'm sure that is deliberate. I mean, that's the kind of thing that these writers do all the time in the industry. It's so fun. I think he went right up there. Why didn't he go up there? He was going to surprise him. But Yasmin put a stop to all of that. But I mean, Kit Harington is not afraid of being naked in front of all sorts of different people, and he certainly works out to be able to to show himself in these scenes. There is a line later on about his boarding school days, and I think
Yes,
his lack of shame came all just through that.
yeah, that's in the very next scene after he walks out. She calls him directly out on it, like going like, "Are you getting off on the fact that he's, obviously attracted to you?" She doesn't put it in those fine point terms, but basically, that's the gist of it. And she even calls out that he had some experimentation in his boarding school days, which, of course, by the way, that has been brought up so many times in this episode of this season of the show. They've mentioned it when they were all at the house, and one of the uncles was talking about it. And then just last week or two, whatever week when they were down in Ghana, yes, last week, where what's his name?
Oh, Kwabena.
When Kwabena goes, it wasn't good enough that they would import buggery, but so it's like also referring to the boarding schools that he went to when he was down in Ghana. So it's again brought up again over and over again. But apparently, hey, he says it's like prison. When you're down in the that when you're in a boarding school, like there's no questions, don't ask, don't tell, as far as that.
Blowjobs don't count.
Right. But the beyond that, it is the indignant way he responds to Yasmin, who is obviously reading the scene correctly. Another thing that I think is really interesting in this episode of the show, is how people react in the moment, but internalize the information. And when Harper confronts Yasmin in the moment, she's like, "You just are trying to cash in." But of course, something has been incepted into her mind, this negative opinion about Whitney. And then she shows up in the room and she reacts the way she does. And Henry acts like, "Whitney's done all this for us. You should be more appreciative of it." But the second they are at dinner that night, he starts asking the auditor, being like, "So tell me more about this audit. What's going on here?" So he starts getting very suspicious of Whitney. So it's very interesting to see like how this, this domino effect that happens, that even if in the moment it looks like they are not receiving the information, it is getting through. And by the way, by the end of the episode, it gets through to everybody, apparently.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, they protest a little bit too much, but they're obviously thinking about that down the track. The same with the auditor. I mean, Whitney is, for someone that's just very shrewd and calculating, he's very sensual as well. Like he knows how to, a bit of a hand touch here, a bit of a hair pull. He's always in there, male or female. He's a very interesting, slimy character.
Yeah, well, how did you take that when he is, and then maybe that's another question to touch on, especially because we hear him in that conversation or that voiceover addressing Henry. When Henry watches him put his hand on the auditor's hand, and then later, of course, he puts his hand on Henry's thigh, and Henry kind of blows it off like no big deal, but he obviously knows that there's intention there, but even though he's kind of blowing it off. But more to the point is, do you think that Whitney is like in love with him? Or is this, I think the talented Mr. Ripley reference you bring up is very on point, because that is the same kind of dynamic you have there, right? Where there obviously is an attraction and there actually is the Dickie in that story.
Yeah.
Appreciates the attention, is like aware of it and appreciates it, but and it ends up becoming his undoing. So it'd be very curious to see if this follows the same pattern by the end of the season. But so how do you read that? Do you think that is it a love-hate relationship? Does he want to be him? Like, I wish I had the wealth and the success he has. Is it a real attraction, or is it more than that? Like, how do you read their relationship?
I think Whitney is just very calculating, and he likes to use everyone's vices against them.
Oh, for sure.
Whether it be fentanyl laced cocaine or sex or money. The intentional touch that he gives the auditor, Henry Muck, he was almost a little bit jealous of that,
Yes.
or maybe he flashes back to when he's been touched like that by Whitney, whether it's not unusual, but it's just, even though it may not be overtly sexual, it's definitely intimate. And it just points to a little bit more than business, which I think Whitney just loves to get into the weeds in that. Like everything is sex, everything is people's vices and people's pleasures, and he gets off on having those levers on every single person that he meets.
And it's how he does business, right? We discover by the end of the episode, we have it explicitly called out. I love that interaction, by the way. You touched on it right there. I love the fact of what you said, that he almost looks jealous. And speaking to Kit Harington, which isn't one of my favorite actors, but I think he did such a great job in this moment, because you read exactly that. He touches him, and there is both things. There's a moment where he feels like jealous, and like, even if it's not overtly sexual jealousy, maybe he's just like, hey, I'm supposed to be the one that you're paying all this attention to. So there's just an emotional jealousy there, if nothing else. But then again, there is in the back of his mind what Yasmin told him, because then he keeps drilling in on what exactly is going on with this audit. And then Whitney tries to change the topic, but he keeps drilling in on it. So it's a combination of, like you said, there is that little bit of jealousy, but also he's thinking, hold on a second, this is how he gets his way. He's done that to me. I've been managed by him before as well. So it makes him suspicious. And it's all happening at the same time. It's really a fascinating and subtle way that they do that.
That is a great point. Yeah, he also twigs that he could be, part of the scheme.
Yeah. And then, of course, he starts worrying about this. And as soon as he starts hearing news about like a secondary audit, again, this idea that even after they have that whole night where he seems to be 100% on Whitney's side there, seems to be, that the next day he's just like, hold on a second, what's actually going on here? So all that, it's bubbling underneath. All of this has been bubbling up.
And it was a long day for old Henry, going out at night and then kicking on in the morning, the whole next day, I think.
Jon Snow went beyond the wall. What's beyond that wall? We don't want to know what's beyond that wall.
Well, there's a hole in the bucket. There's also a hole in the wall.
Exactly. Maybe that's what was happening beyond the wall. We didn't know what's going on there. Like, it's just like, that's like prison. It's like boarding school up there. Yeah. Okay, next scene, we have loved this. I had to quote it because it was such a pointed critique of, Trump, basically, in the midst of this show where they're talking about when the labor politician shows up and is talking to Tender and is making fun of the United States and their current moment. But it's such a small moment, but it's very telling. They say, some here think Americans got bored of having the best lives, so they elected a narcissistic dementiac to detonate it all, so that their kids might earn factory workers' wages building widgets pathetically stamped made in America. Ouch.
Right. Great writing. I love that. I love that line. There's so many like that. That's so good.
But it is important here that I have like a little preamble in this episode of real world correlations to the scam that they basically outlined here. And the one that came to mind immediately for me was the collapse of FTX, the Bankman-Fried crypto bank that turned out to have Alameda Labs, I think it was called, research. That was their investment arm. But what it turned out happening was that they were buying the tokens from the crypto and then investing in these technologies by overpaying for things. And then they were feeding that money back in to the FTX side of things and then minting more coins and then funding their activities using the coins. So they were basically printing the money and setting its value themselves. And that turned out to be a total scam and, of course, collapsed. And that was the one that came to my mind. So I was looking for other correlations. And there was Wirecard from Germany, which I think is a direct correlation to what we see here. identically when they began, they were doing transactions for porn and for gambling. This was too early. It was like 1999 or 2000 when the bank founded, or this platform founded itself. So this is before we had like OnlyFans, but pretty much very similar to this. And then falsified these transactions, set up bank accounts in Asia, and then overpaid for all this real estate and all these businesses out in Asia. And then Ernst & Young signed off on this. But of course, all the transactions were falsified. But most importantly of all, and this is where I'm curious how they keep bringing in the government politicians into this conversation, was that the German government was so on board, so behind this successful business, which had been growing like crazy, that when the Financial Times started writing articles trying to basically unwind the reality of what was going on and how this was all a house of cards ready to collapse, they actually investigated the Financial Times. They tried to sue them for the lying in their journalism rather than going after the actual culprits. And eventually the whole thing collapsed, and it was incredibly embarrassing to Merkel's government at the time. By the way, over here in the United States, I had no idea about this. And I'm like, well, obviously that is the direct correlation to what we're seeing here. But the reason I mentioned that is because it seems at this moment in the show that Harper and co are going to win this argument, but that's not how it played out. This thing continued for years because the German government like helped the cover up of this whole thing. So I do wonder if that is still what's being set up here.
Yeah, I wonder if the German government tried to save face, or just they did believe in this company, or surely the cracks would begin to show. And these kind of things go deep, don't they, after years and years and years of intertwining.
I think it's a combination. I mean, I also think about like Theranos, how they were like so connected to a lot of very powerful Republican fundraisers and very connected people. And Bankman-Fried, when he was, with FTX, was funding a lot of Democrats. He was very much giving a lot of money to the Democratic Party and funding a lot of those campaigns, probably as a way to get a toehold in politically as well, to help him with the growing the business. But like you said, I think at some point, and that's what's kind of fascinating about it, it's what Whitney is pitching here to Henry and also to his COO. He's like, we just have to keep lying a little bit more because if we get big enough, like if once the government has their hand in the kitty as well, it's like everybody now is vested in making this thing continue, which is the real fascinating aspect of this, because I think it says something about the culture and our economies in general, like just the modern economies, probably in most of these richer countries, period, which is the idea that maybe Whitney's right, is basically what I'm kind of coming down to, that if he's just like, if I keep lying until I get to a certain size, then I'm like too big to fail, right? Like they will bail us out to save their own necks, right? We just have to keep lying long enough to get that big. And maybe that is the twist that we'll see at the end of the season.
Yes, but what does that do to your soul when you're constantly lying to everybody?
Yeah, in the scenes for next week, again, just minor spoilers for one scene, but Henry says directly to him that it's like, you can't build an entire world when everything is a lie. And Whitney's basically like, is that true? And maybe that's the question. That's the question. Can everything be a lie? And, the business survives. So that's the question. All right. So then that night, of course, continuing this night out that Henry has with, he starts drinking. We know he's been drinking a little bit more and more. Whitney's definitely egging him on. And like you said, he finds people's weaknesses and he exploits them. And that's one of them. But more than that, of course, is they go out clubbing afterwards. I got to tell you, this scene is insane because not only is it that this guy, I assume this guy's a pretty public figure. Is he just, the whole bathroom scene, I'm just like, aren't you afraid of someone snapping a photo of you and that going public? I don't know. Like you want a little more discretion, I would presume.
Yeah, I did think that, but it looks like it's the kind of club where everyone can kind of shed their public persona and no one speaks about what happens in that club when they leave. I've been to plenty of gay clubs and it's always full of women. But this club, definitely there was no
And this one,
women.
there were no
It
women
was
there.
only,
Exactly.
it was only dudes and they were, yeah, debasing themselves quite considerably. So, yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of public figures in there.
But for all we know, Whitney had someone with a camcorder going the whole time. Do you think this is the first time they've done this, or do you think this is a regular occurrence for them?
For Whitney and Henry, I reckon it's the first time, but it's been a long time coming. I think this is the first night I think that Henry has drunk to excess since he got clean with
That's
Yasmin.
a good point. Yeah, it's a
I
slippery
think,
slope here. Yeah, so this is probably the most out of
yeah.
control he's been. Yeah.
And so he likes to have a big one. Like when Whitney leaves to go to, I think he goes to Accra again. There's a great shot of Henry in the morning. He's just like, well, I think I'm just going to kick on, just going to push on. And we see him later with a couple of prostitutes later in the afternoon. Yeah, yeah, fun night.
Quite a night for him. Yes, exactly. That's the other thing I was not baffled by, but really curious about. Like, how long has it been since he was, a heroin addict, at Christmas time? So I wonder how many months have passed between then and now, because he was sexually dysfunctional completely at that point, and now he's getting an anonymous blowjob in the bar, and then having a three-way right afterwards or shortly thereafter. So I'm like, man, he's really bounced back. He's really bounced back, this guy.
Yeah, good on him. Yeah.
Oh, before I forget to bring it up, I do want to mention that someone on Spotify reached out to us. Don't have your name in front of me. Apologize, but love that you reached out to us, by the way. Talking about the heroin scene where Jim died 2 episodes back at this point. Now I think it's 2 episodes ago. And I rewatched the scene, finally went back and rewatched it. So yeah, Darren, just to circle back to that, we were wondering, is it possible? We do see how underhanded, maybe not Whitney. Whitney doesn't want to go directly to murdering people, but there seem to be other greater powers here that may actually rub people out if they think that they're a threat. And it's exactly like this person who reached out on Spotify mentioned, that they've run out of coke, that he's been turning the music up on and on. And right before Rishi goes to the bathroom and finds his own stash, he drops a black bag on top of the table and says, "This one's on me, guys," and then turns up the music and then walks out the door. And then Rishi's out of the room. And then Jim picks up the black bag, does some of the coke, and of course, ODs on the fentanyl. So my question to you is, let's say that your original theory is right, that this guy was a plant, that he was put in there by Whitney or somebody else even higher up than that, protecting the deal, and then, discrediting Jim here and minimally wanting Jim to be caught with drugs and Rishi as well. Then was he trying to murder him with that black bag? I mean, a black bag immediately makes me think about it's the death bag, right? So
totally. Yeah, it might have had a little X on it or something. I saw that comment. That's awesome. Thanks for that. That makes it a lot clearer. And I thought Whitney was behind it, and you thought that there was some powers that were possibly higher than Whitney. And I think that has been answered in this episode, that there is some bit of Russian action involved in the whole thing. So, yeah, I reckon he's a Russian operative. I think we see another Russian operative, or maybe the guy in Accra that punched Sweet Pea as well could be getting some pay from the Russians. And I think we see one in the dining room scene before Sweet Pea meets with the potential whistleblower. So, yeah, I think you're right in that Whitney has got some help.
Yeah, we'll break that down, that scene as well, because that's a very important element here, is when he talks to Ferdinand, I think is this guy who is his right-hand man, who's been in this rooms all the time. Like, is he the guy who's pulling all these strings? Well, apparently it's not him, but he is the one who originally brought this relationship to Whitney. Speaking of Whitney, by the way, and speaking of him being this Ripley-like character, we do find out that Whitney is a complete fabricated persona, right? The name is fabricated. We see his original ID. We see him with like piles of cash at one point later in the episode, contemplating whether he's going to run or whether he's going to stay. He looks very different in his ID. I don't know if he's honestly, I don't even know if it's the same actor or some prosthetic. It looks like he's had some work done beyond just taking his glasses off. So I do wonder if he did actually have, in the context of the show, not the actor, I should say, but in the context of the show, if this that we were supposed to assume that maybe he has some cosmetic surgery. But and then he starts singing Whitney Houston, which I think is fascinating because it indicates to me, the way I read that, you even said this earlier in our coverage, like that's not usually a man's name. And he starts singing, I want to dance with somebody. And then I wonder, like, did he just make up the name? Like, period, right? Like, so anyway, what'd you think of some of these revelations?
Yeah, I think he's Lithuanian. Is that right on the passport?
I think
thought
so,
I
yeah.
saw that, but yeah, right. Yeah, so funny. So I guess Whitney Houston, I mean, those songs get into Lithuania, and that was his favorite growing up, and just takes on that persona. Yeah, so funny. Oh, you said something else there
that he might have had plastic surgery, or he looks very different than he does in the passport.
He does look very different. I did love when he was on the private plane and the pressure is weighing on him desperately. Yes. And there's a very obvious cut to him looking at the exit door of the plane. It just says emergency exit only. It's just like, oh, come on, guys. Because there is talk.
Yeah.
There is talk of suicide earlier on in the episode, I think, when he's talking with Henry and he says, oh, yes, my mum committed suicide. You know, she couldn't handle the beatings. And Henry just looks at him and goes, yeah, I don't think I believe that.
Right. He's like, everything, he says everything you say is like out of a bad novel or something.
Yeah, which, we might have studied back then in Lithuania, dreaming of an escape out. And yeah, lying is all he could do.
Yeah, I think all this stuff he says is baloney because he's fully everything he says is invented. And Harper calls him out on that later on, saying like, everything you say is a lie. You're full fabrication, just like the business itself is just completely invented. And that's an interesting parallel, by the way, that if he's like, I am nothing, like I am just an empty thing, just like perfectly. I love that you keep bringing up that Mr. Ripley connection, because I think now I can't help not seeing it, which is just like Ripley. If you read the book, he is fully empty. He's like a true sociopath, which of course Harper mentions here as well. And he has nothing. He's just a big empty. And then he believes that even though I'm nothing, I'm just a performance, that I matter. And he desperately wants to matter in a way that these people around him, the class system in England, allows these people to exist. And maybe they're just as empty as he is, but they have class like put on them. So they get to present themselves as like, well, I matter because I have a title or something. And he's just this performance. And he even says, like, in America, you get to do that. You get to invent who you are. Mm-hmm. So he wants that for himself, but it's a direct correlation to what Tender is, right? Tender is literally nothing except for the story it tells. And he's like trying to say, isn't that enough to just be this performance?
Yes, and you brought up a few episodes ago his conversation with Harper about his funeral business he had. That it shows that he's just nothing. He has no care for anything in the world, and he thinks that's the best way to get rid of people. And Harper, actually, as immoral as Harper is, she saw that and she went, yeah, not for me.
We've jumped to that full conversation with Harper, but it's so fascinating. I want to dig into it even more. For that same reason, she not only calls him a fake, and she says, I was so disturbed by you talking about how you made your first riches was because you did not recognize that ritual is essential. It's like part of being human, and you can't even see that because you're not human. And he goes, oh, is that what it did for you? You went to your mom's funeral? And she's like, I didn't go to my mom's funeral. So from one sociopath to another.
Brilliant.
And of course, so many other things happen with Whitney. We'll circle back to them over the course of the conversation, I think. But let's just keep on Harper for a minute. Earlier in the episode, before she has that really amazing conversation with Whitney that we're already touching on, She goes to the Alpha conference. She obviously has raised an alarm for Yasmin. Yasmin, on the outside of this initially, now shows up at the conference to listen to what she has to say. And honestly, like, immediately there is the stock drops like 28% just based on her comments, and this kind of goes viral. But what's fascinating here is I don't even feel like she could have been so much harder. I mean, she should have, and maybe they're holding this reserve, but she could have just start like showing photographs, like, here's what we found when we were in Africa. But maybe they want to hold off on that. But anyway, what did you think about this whole scene? Oh, and by the way, this is a very important scene retroactively, because Eric is watching her. He says, don't mess this up the way she did on her thesis presentation, which didn't allow her to graduate. So he's like, don't do that again. And of course she does not. She steps up. Great performance, by the way, from Mahala, I forget her name, that she starts off very nervous, but then kind of finds her confidence by the end of it, like really sticks the landing. And he feels pride in her, which of course is very important, because that'll all come full circle when we get to the end of the episode.
Yeah, she's wearing that same grey power suit. I feel like she's worn that in many scenes this season. She takes the USB out of the laptop and she plugs it into hers, and you immediately know that she's not just going to do another little boring speech. She's going to tender a new one. And yeah, it's funny. I thought that we would see some other powerful women, but apart from Yasmin, we did see an old friend who used to work at Pierpoint.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there was information dropped that he works for Jesse Bloom now. So a couple of names from past seasons that are coming back in, because this thing that she's saying is so revolutionary that everybody wants to have a piece of it. And a few extra people walk into the room as she's delivering it. So it has an immediate effect on the market, and tender drops dramatically. Yeah, fun. And I enjoyed Eric just looking on her with pride, like a father would look on a daughter. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe not this father, but but yeah, of course, that's essential for the way things wrap up in this very episode. Oh, I love some of the things she says during this presentation. First of all, going in there and saying, based on the fundamentals of the amount of transactions and the amount of volume and the size of this business, this is overpriced based on the fundamentals. However, that's not factoring in the actual value of the actual business, which is $0, £0, and 0 pence. That's the actual value. So your multiple is too high, and it's definitely too high when you multiply it on 0. I'm like, ouch. And that's when the people start turning up for this. Of course, we find out that Whitney, in the meantime of all this, he has flown out to Accra. Tony has left. He's meeting with this journalist and with Sweet Pea. And by the way, this is me being like very practical about this. The fact he gets there before Sweet Pea and the journalist, like, this is a huge mistake on their part. Like, obviously this information shouldn't have leaked out when they're meeting him, but you need to get there first. Like, when I say first, I mean, like, you need to get there an hour before the meeting.
Yeah.
You don't show up 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
You show up an hour early, and you make sure you follow him from his hotel. You intercept him at the hotel and take him to the restaurant. That's how you handle that.
Yeah, I rationalized that by saying maybe one of them missed a bus or something. Like, I had to rationalize it, because there's no way that you turn up to one of those meetings just on time.
This is so,
like you say.
They're so, it could just be like they're very cocky, but, and maybe the journalist is reluctantly showing up, but Sweet Pea needs to be there like at least half an hour early. Like, you have to factor in what is the earliest possible time anybody could show up, whatever that is. Get there 15 minutes first. That's the only way that works.
Yeah, they both had differing ideas on how to turn a whistleblower, but yeah, that was not on. The fact that Whitney could just get a message and get there 5 minutes before to say all that he had to say, yeah, silly.
And of course, he is making I guess it's not that he's making a veiled threat, but I guess by him not making an overt threat, he reminds Tony of the explicit threat, because he knows that there are higher ups, and he knows how this thing works. And it goes back to last week when Sweet Pea was offering him, like saying, if it's not Whitney that you're afraid of, then who is it? And he doesn't answer the question because he probably knows exactly that everybody, including Whitney, is probably now in bed with these, people who are willing to kill to protect themselves and probably have already.
Yes.
And I actually worried a little bit about Haley in her confrontation with Whitney when she's, okay, another huge revelation here, obviously. Haley's a call girl. All these girls are call girls. And in the same way that, you talk about how he's touching people and he's massaging them in more ways than one, like, maybe physically, but obviously he's finding people who have vulnerabilities and he is pumping them up. And of course, part of that is, get a lot of beautiful young women around and have them laugh at your jokes and take you out for drinks. And hey, they'll even have sex with you. And then you think, hey, I'm so special. But it's worse than that. Not only is the reality you're living in not real, but he's videotaping these sex acts.
Shocking. Just to go straight into that conversation with Haley and Whitney, just what a revelation that she is just an agency girl. But yeah, I mean, it works. You have high class escorts. They're used to mixing in higher social circles. They know how to dress and compose themselves and talk to anybody in the room. They're the perfect ingredient for this business. And we did have an inkling that Haley was in on it, and I think we did mention that there could have been a camera in that room in Austria too, which Haley all but confirms.
Oh, for sure. And of course this is where I felt like she was maybe crossing a line that could get her in trouble. She even mentions what happened to my the girl I replaced, like you told me she had Crohn's disease. And we have never heard from her again. Nobody at the agency's ever heard from her again. Like, where did she go? I do love the fact that she says, you're going to give me $500,000 in my next paycheck. And he laughs at her. So she goes, fine, 750. And he goes, you think so small. He's like, you're so lacking in ambition, $750,000. She'd asked him for a few millions and make him sweat a little bit.
Oh, look, if one of the girls went missing, he would have to change agencies, surely. He couldn't just go back, oh, we lost that one. Can we have another one?
I do like the fact, by the way, that Haley has not turned out to be an idiot or a pawn. She has a really good read on everybody here. And I did like this twist in her character. And by the way, again, thanks for bringing up talented Mr. Ripley. I can't not bring it up again. I love that she diagnoses him exactly that way. She says, I've been watching you. You are a try-hard loser. So she knows that he's like a big phony and he's just kissing asses and everything he has is a lie or a manipulation of somebody else. He has nothing other than his, what he's trying to suck off of these other people around him. So it's interesting. And then of course she's just saying like, and you're at the end of his rope, end of your rope. But I guess we'll see how that shakes out by the end of the season.
Look, I love how he tries to stay strong in the face of all these insults, all these lies are coming down around him, and he's still doing his best.
Yeah, it's a very interesting read on him. I think this is a really terrific performance because it's someone who isn't really even fully aware of themselves because he is presenting this calm demeanor. But then he is legitimately, again, centered himself. He's like, starts to believe his own BS. And I think by the end of the episode, he really does feel like he can get this thing righted again. But as he's talking to Harper on the phone and being very confident in his conversation, he, of course, has the piles of money and the passport. So he's ready to escape if he needs to. So that's always in the back of his mind. And speaking of escape, there's another escape, like you said, when he's on the airplane and the first shoe drops and he starts thinking about, oh my God, Tony might turn as state's evidence or something. He's looking at the escape, on the door. He's just like, hey, if I pull that lever, this will all be over very shortly.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, there's a little bit of talk of suicide in this
A couple
episode
of times, yeah.
where, yeah, which is a little bit disturbing. And you just, especially what the final shot of the episode, I'm just wondering how if they're hinting at that, yeah, with Eric.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's going to happen to Eric as well. Yeah, and of course that's the scene where he's singing "I Want to Dance with Somebody," which I really enjoyed. And then right after that conversation, I guess it is when we hear him talking to Ferdinand. And this is a little bit of an information dump, but very important and interesting, of course. This revelation that this was a pretty, there was maybe a lot of financial manipulation already, but to grow that Ferdinand had met with these Russian operatives, people connected to the Russian security services, and they are the ones who are basically using this, propping this whole thing up as a way to launder their own wealth. And of course, very dangerous for everyone involved, including Whitney. If Whitney decides to back out of this now, he really is trapped. He's really trapped in this situation. And I think that what's kind of dangerous about this whole situation is that Henry trying to put his foot down and take control of things towards the end of this episode, and Harper, of course, trying to pull this short and making a very public stink about it, that there are very dangerous forces that they are not aware of that could potentially be out to get them. And I'm sure that all that pressure is going to come to bear over the course of the next couple episodes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, they're playing in their own game at the moment with their own rules. But yeah, introducing Russian operatives behind everything, I mean, that changes the rules pretty quickly. And,
Right.
yeah, a quick bit of poisoning and you can get rid of lots of people pretty quickly.
Yeah, and and what's interesting about that too, and we have of course just heard about Navalny's murder, and the Russian operatives who killed him just this week was in headlines. Now this the follow up to that investigation, but it's something that happened in UK borders, within UK borders. But of course, it's also the fact that at that moment, it's such a big revelation, another big twist in this very episode, because I'm still reading the episode as like, oh, Whitney's just like over his skis and he's embarrassing himself, and it's all him. He's been orchestrating this whole thing, and he's just someone who's trying too hard to make it big, and that's he's going to fall flat on his face, and then only find out that he's in this trap himself, right? Like if he decides to rat these people out, he's potentially at risk as well. So they're all in the same trap without but not everybody's fully aware of it yet.
Yes, totally. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, his offsider, the strange European offsider, is in bed with the Russians, and yeah, it's all mixed up. They're all going to go down. There's no easy escape. There's no emergency exit.
And to Whitney's credit, in this case, when the offer's made that, hey, we can kill off Tony, he's like, no, I think I can get him on our side still. I don't think we need to murder him yet. So I think we have other options. So, I mean, he could just be like, hey, just kill him off, which I guess could also be, it could raise flags of its own, obviously.
Yeah, and they needed Tony to stay on message, and he does stay on message, and yeah, it shocks everybody.
Okay, next giant revelation, and then another great scene to follow up on it. You have this text message that Eric gets while he's with his daughter, no less.
Oh my God.
And the revelation, of course, that this was all a setup and foreshadowed, by the way, by Haley earlier, saying that, like, and what about that young girl that you had me set up with that hedge fund manager, right? And of course, this is the young girl that hooked up with the hedge fund manager. It was Dolly at the hotel. And by the way, again, this show that last week, I'm like, man, I do not like this normalization of the, call me daddy scenario that we saw last week. But I was being set up by the show, man. That is just making this whole video so much worse. He's literally with his daughter and he's thinking in his mind, oh my God, what if this video gets out? What is going to happen to me? And of course, we think at this moment, Eric is compromised. This is going to be the end. He replaces Harper on this face-to-face on CNN the next day. And like, oh, he's going to undermine their own case because he's been compromised by this video. But that's not what happens at all. But before we get to the actual CNN interaction, what did you think, man? My heart was in my throat when I saw that video. It somehow, as obvious as it is, I did not think the show was going to go there, but it did.
I mean, the fact that her name is Dolly as well, it's like, gee, come on. The look on Eric's face when he gets the text and he's talking to his daughter, and it looks like a really loving relationship. They've actually kind of had fun together. She wanted to go home with him instead of mum. He's bonding, and just when he looks away, the look on his face, and you're like, what has he received? Tell me what he's received.
I know. I'm like, what is happening?
Oh,
what an incredible performance, by the way, too, right? He is like in sheer terror. But yeah.
He stares death in the face. I mean, your life is over. Just that information. I think on her passport, I think it might have said she was 15. Yes. I mean, just gone. And yes, the show did set us up for that, didn't it? Yeah, poor old Eric. I would never think that this would be his downfall. But yeah, he shows a very brave face on the CNN or whatever the news bulletin is, and he's a very formidable sparring partner with Whitney until old Tony Day comes on the screen and undermines everything. But yeah, killer performance from Ken Leung, just so good. And if this is his last episode of Industry, yeah, he does a really great job.
Man, he has to do so many different shades of in here, like the shame and the shock, and then that steely resolve in that CNN interview. But I love when he walks over to him, and once again, speaking to the fact that things are happening maybe above Whitney's perspective, because he's like saying, like, what are you talking about? When he turns on him and says, do not press a desperate foe too hard. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. What if the outlet I use is through you? Basically meaning that, and it makes sense what he's saying there, right? Is the idea that if you don't leave a way out, like if you corner an animal, it could get really ugly really fast, right? Because there's no way out other than like turning right back on you. And by the way, given all that, this is relatively reserved, but he sticks to his guns. And I love this, by the way. Just keep honing in. And even when Tony comes up there and they're like, oh my God, it's over. They've turned him. This is all over. And he just goes, look, you know what? You're going to throw me under the bus. I'm not a good guy. I'm a bad guy. All I'm saying is, hey, you know what? There's a lot of money at stake here, everybody. Let's do an audit. You open for that? Come on. Open up your books. Come on, everybody, let's do an audit, which seems he comes at it like such a pragmatic point of view. It's like if Whitney's just like, no, then people are going to start being like, why not? And of course, that's all you need. That lack of confidence can literally torpedo the company. I mean, think about companies that are real companies that lose the faith of the public and those stocks go to almost nothing. And they are foundationally legitimately the companies they were before. Here's a situation where if anyone peeks under the covers, there's like nothing there. It's like just a cloud of smoke.
Yeah, I did like how Tony Day kind of introduced it, like a bit of racism into that. It's like, well, this is Africa, So he plays by slightly different rules. But yeah, is that a Art of War quote about escaping through you or that kind of thing? If you cut off all escape routes, I don't know.
I don't think I don't think if he's quoting someone or if he just came. It's possible. It could be a quote from.
So good, so steely, so stoic, and yeah, never loses his nerve because he's got nothing to lose anymore.
Yeah, they just keep sticking to that new audit. And like, that's all you need, man. That's all you need. And once again, there's what politics can really bite you in the ass, that the current Labor Party is very vested in making this thing look real. But there is more than one party that is all vying for that next election cycle. And they're like, why aren't they allowing a new audit? And that's all it takes for this whole house of cards to fall apart. Henry, by the way, goes back to office and tries to put his foot down. I am the CEO. He is indeed made the CEO. And again, this is like Whitney, who was trying to prop up these figures, and where it might bite him in the ass again, that he has now taken that CEO position and fired this auditor and said, hey, I'm going to get us a new auditor to find out what's actually going on. And Whitney's like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. And that's when he delivers the letter, which we haven't heard all of it yet, but I assume we'll hear the rest of it. But it seems like this is going to implicate him in the shenanigans there, even if he wasn't aware of them. But of course, he is the CEO, right? So this is not going to go well for Henry, unfortunately. If he tries to do the right thing, it may very well be very bad for him and for Yasmin, of course.
Yeah, I love how the Dear Henry paid off at the end. And yeah, Henry fired the auditor. I bet he enjoyed firing the auditor because, yeah, he did feel a bit jealous of that hand holding earlier on. So that would have satisfied him a little bit.
That alone, right? Exactly.
And yeah, the hole in the bucket and the whole letter. I thought the letter was going to actually really spell out exactly how Henry is going to go down or what he's got over him. But poor old Henry, the shame and the feelings of failure of his previous CEO job with Lumi is going to come back again. And I don't know if he's going to make it either. I mean, everyone's on a knife edge at the end of this episode.
Yeah, I've always worried that was the shape of the season when we see how low he is at the beginning. And I just remembered something I want to circle back to before we get to the end. But speaking of suicide, but I always worried that would be the direction that Henry was headed in because, after the debacle with Lumi, and now for him to be like built back up again by Whitney, who from the very beginning we knew he was taking advantage of this opportunity, this position that Henry was currently in, and then to only, if he falls again, like what's that going to do to him? I don't think he's going to recover from that one if that's the case. Oh, the thing I was going to bring up and also circles back to this threat of suicide throughout this episode of TV was when he calls up the Cal Penn character. And as soon as the phone rings, he just answers it. And he says he's trying to get him on his side to like maybe get him to like speak out in some way and protect Tender in some way. And he just says to him, he goes, go hire a lawyer or kill yourself, whatever's cheaper.
Wow. Yeah. Cal Penn always has the greatest lines in this show. I'm glad we saw him just for a little bit. But yeah, kill yourself again. I mean, yeah, it's a bit over the top. I hope that's not where it's heading with any of the characters, really, especially with Henry, because poor old Henry's being set up from the start. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm so fascinated in these arcs, and we know industry loves finishing off a season, wrapping it up as if it's the final that you're ever going to see of this show. So hopefully they do it again for this season.
Yeah, I'd love to speculate on that because I don't think there's not been an announcement for a 5th season of the show. There never is because the show is, modestly successful. And it's also not that successful, honestly. So even though the ratings have been up at the start of this season, they've been, as usual with the show, it peters off over the course of the season and then people catch up with it at some point in the future. But it's always like this on this knife's edge of whether it comes back or not. It's definitely not broken out, probably not to the extent they were hoping it would. But yeah, so again, I think they're probably going to shoot the works in the final 2 episodes. And we only have 2 more episodes. So imagine that. I mean, it's part of what's exciting about the show is that they go for broke every single season. And I assume that they're doing it again. They will do it again this season and then reset the table again for if there is a season 5. A couple more things happen, of course, by the time we get to the end of the episode. Actually 2 really important scenes, at least 2 more important scenes. One, of course, is Haley outlining everything to Yasmin and laying it all out, what her position was, that they were manipulated by Whitney. They were compromised. They were videotaped, including their the slurp heard around the world apparently was recorded. Great, terrific. Can't wait to see that on the internet. And that Haley is specifically, and again, exactly, this is so hard. And Yasmin has to receive this, and you see her kind of take this again, subtle performance here. Like when these words come out of Haley's mouth, she takes this in the face like like a bit of a punch. That she says that Whitney finds people that are weak and exploits their weakness. And of course, this is Harper again at the very first scene in this episode telling her he saw you and your husband coming and he took advantage of you because you guys were suckers. And she's like, oh, getting told by these people over and over again that I didn't see this coming. I was hearing what I wanted to hear and I was taken advantage of. And here you have this girl who's, right out of not even, she's probably like college age and, prostitution, and that she's telling her the way the world works. And it's a tough pill for her to swallow.
Yeah, very, very street smart is Haley, and not all protected and elite like Yasmin. Multiple times this season, she's had that stunned look on her face where she thinks she's got everything in control, but no, getting used and abused by these people again, once again.
Exactly. And it's interesting when Yasmin asks specifically, what did Whitney tell you? And he said, be in their lives, was that what he did. And then she also says that access is what makes you really powerful or what makes you really rich. But I couldn't help. I was just listening to a podcast this week about some of the revelations from the Epstein files. And it was the same situation. Epstein is writing in these emails to these very powerful people. He's not that rich at the beginning of this whole thing. He's very young. He fakes his own, he doesn't actually have a degree. He fakes it. And then he gets discovered, by the way, in his own biography. This is Epstein himself, gets discovered as not actually having the degree he claims to have. But he's always hanging around with these people. And little by little, in a way, like, because he's kind of scrappy, it's kind of like him being the Harper character here on the show. He starts to make his way up the ladder and managing more and more people's money. But the way he befriends these people is by giving them girls, giving them access, and introducing them one to each other. And you see these in the email correspondence where he's always saying, like, come to this party. And Elon Musk is like, I'm not coming to the party. And he's like, this person will be here and this person will be here. He says, no one over 25 will be there, which of course is like a little code word there. But it's like he's telling people what they want to hear, giving them access to other people, giving them access to girls in some cases. And then, of course, there's the whole story that came out this week that he tried to blackmail Bill Gates, and Bill Gates saw this coming right away and basically tried to countersue him, but there was trying to be some kind of blackmail as well. So the point is that just like Epstein and some of the revelations, which I don't think were all of this stuff wasn't out in the open until just the past few weeks. So obviously the writers stepped into this, or maybe knew some of it from what had been reported earlier, but just kind of concrete in the actual explicit email interactions. But the reason I bring all this up is I don't think that it's only Jeffrey Epstein. I think that the show is saying this is unfortunately how a lot of these people operate. And Whitney's just another one of these wannabes who becomes central to these wealthy people by just being a hanger-on, but eventually becoming the one who manipulates all of them.
Yes, very troubling. Big Epstein vibes I got from this episode for sure, especially with Eric's suitor.
Underage girls.
I think there was a rumor that Epstein's fabulous apartment in New York had cameras in every room. So you could definitely understand that he's got videotape of all sorts of sexual trysts with very, very powerful people that, gives him power. So, definitely felt that all throughout.
And that was one of the revelations in this podcast as well, that this journalist was mentioning that, for example, these hints of blackmail and these questions of like, he was a pretty small timer and then suddenly he's managing hundreds of millions of dollars, $500 million in wealth at one point. It's like, how does he get all this access? How does these people trust him with all this money? And what they basically said is everything we're seeing here that seems really, really shady and hints at worse things is in emails. It's like, we don't know, for example, like when he's actually managing someone's money, like to your point, there were cameras in the bedrooms in his apartment. So we don't know what was happening in face-to-face conversations. And when everybody's just like, how did he get so rich so fast? Maybe the question is pretty obvious.
Oh, look, I just love how he's barely literate in his emails. It's like, if I got
Yes.
emails from this guy, I'd be like, sorry, no, I'm not replying to that. You can't even spell.
Oh man, I mean the way he pivots too, by the way, where he's like trying to lure a Musk in one case, and he says something about girls basically, and then Musk is like, that doesn't sound like, that sounds like not a good scene for me, and he's like, exactly, but this guy's going to be there. It's like it's so transparent and cheesy, and it works somehow. It's pathetic. It's really pathetic. But I mean, I said this in the preamble as well. We're in a culture, I think, where we love our con men, and and Epstein was one of these people, obviously.
Yeah.
But and we see it explicitly in this very episode, where Harper just basically turns on him and says, "You're just a cheap con man." But that's not necessarily not a way to get ahead in business in a way. And I was going to say now, but maybe it was always that way, and we just know more, or maybe know too much now.
Yeah, I mean, movies have been made about these types of characters, and they're the heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking like something like Wolf of Wall Street, for example. I mean, he's an outright criminal, but he's a hero in that film. You get behind him, and there's plenty of anti-heroes in film that have similar stories to Whitney or Epstein. It's just once you delve into underage girls, every sympathy disappears, and yeah, it's just gone.
It is. You make a really valid point there that somehow, as long as you don't get to that level, that everything's kind of okay up until that point. But once it becomes underage girls,
that's the unforgivable bit.
I do, by the way, just in defense of that movie, because I think a lot of people do read it, and I don't think you're saying this, but I wanted to be clear. I think a lot of people read The Wolf of Wall Street as telling us that this guy's like heroic, that it's understandable why he is adored by certain people. But I always think about the very final shot of that movie where the camera turns on the audience watching him. And I think that is Scorsese telling us that we do admire these people, right? Like, so it's not saying that it's right or wrong. It's saying that culturally we do admire these people, even when we see them at their worst. We still kind of admire them.
Yep, excellent point.
Okay, one more scene and then we can wrap up, which is maybe the most important scene of this whole entire series up until this point, which is Eric brought so low, having the lawyer there, Harper asking, please tell me. And he's like, I don't want you to think of me that way. I can't even tell you what this is. Totally understandable, by the way, that Eric does not want to confront this. I love that he prefaces all of it being like, you can call me a coward. I'm going to stand over here and take whatever you say to me. I understand. But like you said, again, this hint of suicide that haunts this entire episode of TV, him saying that if at the end of the year the short works out, I just ask that you give me back my original investment only. He's not asking for anything beyond that, just my original nest egg to be made out in trusts for his daughters. That's it. And I'm like, he does not even assume that he is going to be in the picture at that point. So that is truly devastating.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when Eric and Harper are in a room and there's a witness, you know it's going to be trouble. And yeah, the beautiful reveal that the lawyer was sitting there, it's just, yeah. Yes, poor old Eric. As you say, he was writing himself off. And he's exiting the story, and I think he's exited for good. And I think that haunting final credits shot of him walking down a street, I think that says suicide to me. And I think that's the end. That's the end of Eric. As sad as it is, as tough as it is to accept, and how symbolic that shot is, I don't think there's another way to read it. What do you think?
Yeah, I hope it's not the case. I don't know exactly how to read that scene. One thing that I read in an article about this episode of the TV is that this is Eric's exit from the show. They don't seem to be indicating that he commits suicide, but it's possible that we infer that, like you said, in this final moment. So this could actually be Eric exiting the show. And what an incredible showcase for this actor. Ken Lung, just amazing performance here across the board. But yeah, I mean, I'm really going to miss Eric, which really is such an incredible performance in the show. And really, all the scenes he has with Harper elevate the show. But I mean, I guess if he needed to disappear so that Harper could become the full version of herself, maybe that's a necessity. But yeah, I mean, this is very hard to imagine him coming back from this. And I really worry about him as the character himself.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, look, it is a TV show, so they can just bring him back whenever they want. But I thought it was quite an elegant. I don't know if that's the right word, but it was a very interesting way to see him off. And I mean, thinking back to when I first saw the show, he was the only familiar face on the poster for this show. I mean, everyone else was almost a newcomer.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he's had a fairly great career, 4 seasons with industry, and he's the better actor for it, I think.
Yeah, a couple more things that happen in that interaction with Harper, of course, is that moment where he says that even with his daughters, he has never really felt like, and this is where it really feels like this is the end for this character on the show, not maybe his end, but the end of his path on this show, is when he says that he never felt that familial pride in his daughters or in he literally did not think it was something he was capable of, and that he felt that for her when she presented the day before, which I think is very important, right? That he has, he foot the bill. And like, to your point, by the way, you can imagine that this thing works out, they get rich, and maybe next year he's like in behind the scenes being like, I can still fund your next short, like he still has cash. So there's still that possibility. But I think this is actually smart. If this is going to be the final season of the show, people should exit in a big way. And they gave him a big exit. So I think that's a good way to do it.
Yep. Totally agree. Yep, big exit. That's what we want. And yeah, what an exit. And it's still got 2 episodes to go of this season. Is that right?
2 more, yeah. And as he's walking down the street, by the way, I don't know if that's the suburbs we saw him in his retirement, maybe heading back to that house, crestfallen as we see, and God knows what will happen when he gets back home. But, and by the way, again, that Joni Mitchell song, I See the World from Both Sides Now, playing on the soundtrack. So,
yep, good pickup.
Yeah, and that is the episode. What an episode. A couple of things I wanted to circle back to that I forgot to bring up in the moment, which is, I think it's interesting to see the Whitney and Henry sexual tension here, because there was some similar sexual tension between Rob and Henry last season. And I remember that one time when they were taking psychedelics, that I thought that maybe something was going to happen, but instead Rob just started having dreams about his mom urinating. That whole part of the show that I loved so much. So it's been hinted at multiple times here. And interestingly, there it seemed to be like a competitiveness. Like Henry knew that Yasmin was attracted to Rob, and he had youth and this swagger that people were attracted to. And then, of course, there was this there's like a sexual competition within them. So it's interesting that there is this dynamic again where he gets to show off in a way in front of Whitney, and knowing that Whitney wants what he has, which of course is this title and class and all the things that kind of come along with it, the UK. But I did think it was an interesting theme to circle back to this year.
Yeah, totally. Another middle class person that Henry is in competition with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you think about that. Speaking of middle class, I love when they have that conversation by the riverside, and he puts his hand on his thigh, and that Henry doesn't react to it the way he assumes. He just brushes it off. And he goes, "Don't try so hard, man. I have middle class friends. You're just one of my middle class friends," which is hilarious, right? Because it again drives home, honestly, for me, being in the US, what a difference that is. Because here it's like, if you have money, nobody cares about class. And there it's like, yeah, you could be a billionaire. You're still just middle class because, you don't have a title. you're not part of the right family. So it's interesting to see that dynamic there, and that Whitney still is trying to appeal to that aspect of him.
Yeah. Oh, it says so much about his character.
All right. So we will see how things go next week. Looks like there's a lot of confrontation between, I think Whitney seems to still be trying to win Henry over. So I'm curious to see which side of the fence Henry ends up with. But it looks like Yasmin is done with playing along with that and is cozying up to Harper and maybe seeing things her way. Maybe it's time for her to see the world from both sides now. But so it all remains to be seen. But I'm very curious how they were going to wrap this season of TV up, and especially if it's like going to play like land like a finale, like what it might be setting up here.
Yeah, and they always do land like finales. So yeah, I'm super interested. It's going to be good to see if Yasmin and Harper are on the same side for once, how powerful they can be. And yeah, I mean, you're hinting at other characters' exits from the series. So yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Yep, it's be thrilling. 2 more episodes. Can't wait to see how it all plays out. Yeah, and what an incredible episode of show this was. Pretty amazing. I remember I was at like 30 minutes in, and I'm like, oh man, was that it? Like we cut the black about halfway through, and I hit the pause button just to see like what's the timer on the episode. I'm like 28 minutes. Got a lot of show to go here.
It keeps going.
It was long too. It was a long. I think they rarely go over an hour. This one was over an hour, so pretty impressive. And yeah, chock block full of incredible revelations. All right, Darren, we will not touch base next week, but enjoy your trip. Going the ski trip again?
Away next week. Yep, I'm flying to Tokyo tonight, so I'll be there for 10 days, and yeah, can't wait. But unfortunately, I'll miss the next episode of Industry, and I'll miss the start of Paradise. But hopefully, I'll be catching up before we meet again.
Yeah, for sure. You'll be back in time to discuss the finale of Industry. And by then, the fourth episode of Paradise, because we're getting 3 full episodes next week. So anyway, everybody stay tuned for all of that. Paradise, Industry wrapping up in the next couple of weeks. Also, of course, next week wrapping up is the finale of the Night of 7 Kingdoms. So we can discuss how that wraps up. We'll discuss how Industry wraps up. We'll discuss how Paradise kicked off. Man, there'll be so many things to talk about when you get back.
Huge couple of weeks. That's what we want.
For sure. All right, Darren. Thank you again for the conversation.
Cheers, Victor. Thanks so much.